Thank you. Again, I appreciate all of you taking the time to learn about how we went from prototype to production and delivered an agent that's really driving value within Postman. This is a curve that some of you out there that are building agents are probably familiar with. We went from being an organization that was very agent first in terms of doing development, but we recognized that we wanted to start creating runtime agents that would make decisions or help us within the organization. So we started to prototype and identify different areas within the business that we might be able to impact. From that, we started getting some initial excitement, whether it be from our CEO or the board, and they came to us and said, hey, we really want to move and take some of these and implement them within our organization. But then the bigger challenge comes, all right, well, how do I measure this? How do I manage this? How do I make sure that we're delivering something that we can maintain? So this is where things such as determining ROI and runbooks start coming into play. So the problem space that we wanted to address, in this case, was enterprise sales. And the benefit of this is a very well-defined process. From identifying an opportunity to renewing that deal, there's steps that would go along in that. And through that, there's a large number of teams that are working together. The challenges that we're running into is these teams have a hard time in terms of handing off that context of information amongst each other. And when you look down in terms of the number of systems that we're using that pull in, these members and these teams are working with, it's just a swarm of systems, right? And the hard part is figuring out, well, what are the relationships of data between them? Ultimately, in the end, we end up with this opaque process where at every step of the way, there's some context that gets lost. And so from our organization's perspective, we wanted to figure out, hey, can we create an agent that can help us through all the phases of the sales process? So we did what every engineering organization would do. We had a hackathon. So we opened this up to our engineers, and over 30 hours, they created a number of agents. But what you see here is just a swarm of different systems and connections and agents that were created. Ultimately, in the end, we identified, hey, there's this win-loss agent that's actually able to give us some really interesting results. And from this, we identified 3 core problems. First, the core problem is that we found that the more discrete the more deterministic the outcome, the better the agent was. And in case of the win-loss agent, I could get something such as here's the reasons why we lost this particular account, and I could work back from the reasoning in terms of the results I got back from the agent and say, yeah, that looks about right. Maybe our price was too high and we end up losing that deal. But if I were to ask that same agent, all right, well, what's the best way in terms of generating leads? It kind of went off the rail. It would start generating results that were very hard for us to determine, is this right or not? The other thing we found is depending on the complexity of the model, the reasoning that came back was much, much better, but also the confusion in terms of understanding those results became much, much harder. The second thing is this is really a compounding problem. Those of you that have built microservices architecture probably recognize this. A2A and agents community to agents, what we were recognizing is that we were ending up with both compounding cost and compounding confusion. And the challenges in terms of the handoffs and testing between these agents became a much bigger problem. And then finally, one of the other things that we recognize is that this is a decomposition problem. What we were doing is we were creating individual agents, and what we didn't recognize is that all these agents were part of the same domain. If there's any design patterns, Martin Fowler fans out there, you probably recognize this pattern as decomposition. What we recognized is the interface between these systems and the handoff of context that was the biggest challenge. So we have these 3 problems, and what we did is we came up with a framework of 4 solutions to address it. At the foundation, we created a monolith agent. This agent had an understanding of all the knowledge and information that is available as it related to the sales process. Salesforce, Gong calls, it could pull in the transcripts and I can ask it really interesting questions and get interesting results. So, again, this was a great co-pilot, it was a great answer generator, but the challenge we ran into is that, if there were some gray areas, it would start making things up. And it was a great generalist, but if I started asking it more specialized questions, it just had too much information and it wasn't able to give us the right result. So we built off of this. The next stage was the decomposition component. And there's 2 key pieces that we implemented here. One is the hallucination layer. Don't recommend something unless you have a clear understanding of where you're getting that information from. And if you don't have it, you need to really explain why you came up with that result. If it's not able to do either of those things, we would just ignore it. And then on top of it, we wanted to create those domain-specific agents. And this was not a coding task. These are actually prompts where I can go in and say, hey, I'm a seller, here's the things I would typically do. And it would go out and it would start answering the questions as it related to that persona. So it sharpened the output and it stopped doing a lot of the hallucinations, but it was confidently wrong. Knowledge and intelligence does not mean strategy. So if I were to ask a sales agent, what persona should I sell to? Any guesses out there in the audience? Which persona would typically be responsible for buying software? Perfect, yes, exactly. So it would come back and say, sell to procurement every time. If I went into my customers and said, hey, I'm going to sell to your procurement organization, they'd laugh us out of the room. So that's where we started to identify the teams that own that strategic content, and we put them in charge of adding that information. So in this case, the sales team would go in and add their account plans. The field engineering organization would add things such as how their solutions plays. And from this, we started to get more and more strategically relevant information in these agents, and the outputs were becoming more and more important. But the challenge is at this point, I had this super agent that had understanding of my entire organization, but there were no controls in place. And that's where we implemented this last layer, which is beyond the model of determining is this right or not, or is this true or not. We needed to add another layer and say, hey, is this content related to the job that's requesting it? So that way, if I went to the CTO agent, that's not going to give me all information as it relates to the P&L of the business. It would take into account my context and my job role and only give me that information that was relevant to me. But what this has done is it identified a couple of areas that we really wanted to lean into in terms of developing additional agents. And really, we've identified what we call this agent autonomy curve. And at each steps of these, it determines, is it the human or the agent that makes the decision? There's two decisions that have to happen. Who's going to request the information and who determines when to promote it? At the help piece, the human's involved in both of those. I ask the question and I analyze the result. The recommendations piece, the agent starts doing that. But where the biggest step change happens is between that act and own piece, where on the act piece, the agent is doing both sides of that equation within some guardrails, and ultimately, the own piece is what we're all developing towards, which is having long-running agents that will go and own the entire ecosystem. Now, what we saw from this was really surprising. We started getting compounding value within our organization. We went from building an agent, taking a hackathon in 30 hours, down to now we have this framework where within a matter of hours, someone can go in and create the guardrails and then build off this body of knowledge that we have. And on the consumption front, we went from just having a select audience of users who are taking advantage of these agents to now the entire organization being able to identify how they too can get value from it. So we got a compounding value in terms of the time it took to develop these agents, and a compounding value in terms of the people that are getting value of it. And the core benefit of this too is that we also saw a change of behavior in our organization as well. So since the salespeople now know that the context that they create and the questions that they ask also help the underlying value of these agents, we're seeing more discovery go on, and we're seeing better quality of content get created. I'd be remiss to say that we also didn't create a platform to help address this issue. We took this learnings in terms of creating a platform that we were able to build these compounding agents within our organization, and we identified that ultimately in the end, I need to be able to measure the outcomes that are occurring. I need to be able to have a catalog of these agents that are available that my teams could hire, fire, and understand what the impact is, both in terms of the cost and the return on the investment. With that, I appreciate the time today. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, feel free to just connect with me on LinkedIn.